Now I'm with you. Okay. The title of this evening's Dharma talk is No Perceiver, Only Perception. Did I get that right? Good. A lot of ways of saying that. It's a title, it's a talk that I give quite often because I like to emphasize that the presumption that we have as we look out at our world and work with our life is that we impute or make up or believe that we're seeing things, smelling, tasting, touching, thinking, and that there are objects out there that are separate from us, and we are generating that. It's not that something isn't physically separate from us, of course it is. But we take it further than that in order to secure our self-centeredness, our ego. I'm the one who's seeing, I'm the one who's winning, I'm the one who's, oh my gosh, I'm the one that's losing. What will people think? As my mother used to say. What will people think? I remember thinking, I don't have a clue what they're going to think. I have no idea. I probably didn't say that because she would have hit me. That would have been back talk. So the idea here is to help, using this concept of no perceiver, no identity of a perceiving individual person, and nothing, and that there's only perception. So this is also saying, to take it a little bit further, there's also nothing that's being perceived. And of course the thinking mind automatically says, well, that's not true. And if you're not suffering, if you're not having any difficulty with your life, you probably will listen to that and say, okay, say whatever you want to say. This is something that goes back 2,500 years to the time of the historical Buddha, and also has been understood down through the centuries by many other teachers. It is not something to believe. I often say, I'm saying now, don't believe a word I say. Don't disbelieve it, don't believe it, don't do anything with it. Listen, you're here, so you're giving me permission to, as she said, which I'm doing. This is based on my own practice of doing this practice for many, many decades. If you're not suffering, you're not having any difficulty, then go do something else. But if you are suffering and having difficulty, this might be a formula that will work for you. And it's a very simple formula. As I said, Buddhism is not about belief. People impute and think that people believe in stuff. Not the case. Nor do they disbelieve in it. They don't take any position on anything. It's kind of called, what's that called? Open mind, I think, an open-minded attitude. Yeah, just don't select anything. Don't ignore anything. Don't grasp anything. Don't shut down. And in this way, the awareness, which is your fundamental nature, your consciousness, can run free of beliefs and opinions and ideas and threats of hope and fear, and you should do this, you shouldn't do that, and all the rigmarole that's going on all over the world all the time, trying to coax us into doing what somebody else thinks we should do. You shouldn't do anything that you don't want to do. Don't do it. So, no perceiver. There's perception going on, yes. But what we do is we impute or we imagine or make up or believe in somebody who is perceiving. I'm the one who's seeing that. Actually, to say this more clearly, there is just seeing. To one who has realized this and understands this deeply, there's just seeing. There's no individual seeing anything anymore. So therefore, it's just about impossible to take anything personally. Because there isn't any person. when somebody accuses you or makes fun of you or insults you or something like that, the degree to which your self-centeredness is grasped or that you're clinging to it is the degree to which that bothers you. If you actually understand who you are and what this world is, there's no way anybody can insult you. Because every time they did that, all you would see is how confused they are and how they need to do that in order to support their own shenanigans. And of course, the way we, in this particular path, the way we train our minds, the way we encourage ourselves to do this is to call it meditation, call it whatever you want. Sit down, hold still, hold very, very still without being rigid, all of the senses open, and watch what continues to move. If you're holding very, very still for long periods of time, hours, then what eventually starts to show up is the way in which you're adding to your own suffering. The suffering is there. You come into this world, you're going to have some suffering. But we add on to it. We make it worse. Just by struggling with it and again, believing that there's somebody who is suffering and that suffering needs to stop. Sometimes we jump out of that simple situation and we go to blaming somebody. And it's not that somebody over here didn't do something that triggers the suffering over here, or that is in our storage tank, our memory, our subconscious, whatever word you want to use. Of course that happened, but it's not happening to an individual. It's just perception. It's just only perception. Perception only. No self, no other. Don't believe it. It's not about belief. But believe, this is how belief, if you believe in anything, this is what belief does. All investigation ceases. Even Buddhism has that going on, to believe in the Buddha or believe in dependent origination. I don't believe in dependent origination, even though it's the teaching of the Buddha. But use that and look at it for yourself. Is everything dependently arisen? Maybe the Buddha was wrong. Find out. So what we do is we tend to believe that we use the body form, where all the whole sensorium of the physical manifestation, as some kind of proof that we're separate from everything else, because we're over here, everybody else is over there. I just won an award and that person lost their job. Big contrast. We use that kind of chatter in our mind to continue to puff up ourselves as we're the ones who are winning. We do the same thing if we start to lose. Then we go to the other end of the spectrum of ego, self-centeredness, and criticize ourselves and blame ourselves. And here I go again. And why can't I get ahead? And why do I keep doing this? And why? And of course, why questions are circular. Why? Because. Why? Because. Why? Because. There are people who make a fortune trying to tell you why. It's circular. Even the Buddha said, why is there suffering? Because of desire. Why do we suffer? Because we want things to be different than they are. That's kind of enough said right there. We want something else. And what is being taught here through the sitting practice of meditation is to get you to come in, sit down, hold still, look at the wall, and do it for long periods of time so that you can see the way in which you keep confusing yourself. Excuse me. And when you do see the way you're confusing yourself, it's not about stopping that. That's a misunderstanding. There's people making a lot of money getting you to stop acting a certain way, stop feeling a certain way. Do it with drugs, do it with psychology, all kinds of things. Rarely does someone say, you can do this. You can do it yourself. You can do it with your own mind. You don't even need my help. All I'm doing is saying, Go look at your mind. Find out who you are. Leave the monastery, move to Nebraska. No, don't do that. Move to Montreal. No, don't go there either. Well, just stay here for a while. This is an ideal place because that's all we do here. Kind of boring. You know, we come in, we sit down, we hold still, we look at the wall, and the day goes by. Then the next day goes by, the next day goes by. And we have the feeling of not getting anywhere. And that's why it's necessary to have a teaching person so that the teaching person can tell you, that's how it's done. Keep going. This is very easy to get frustrated by not having the conventional, mundane kind of progress happening. Even though some people who practice and teach meditation talk about, well, if you do this kind of meditation, you'll eventually be more peaceful, you'll be more kind, you'll be more. Propaganda. Don't believe it. Don't disbelieve it. Don't do anything with it. I could say, listen to me. You're already doing that for the next 40 minutes or whatever it may be. I was threatening to come in here and play my harmonica. Cody thought that wouldn't be a good idea, so I decided not to do it. So what am I basically saying? I'm saying this is a do-it-yourself, a transcendental do-it-yourself project where you find out what your actual identity actually is. And you can realize that while you're still downloaded into this human form. You can find out who that is, and who that is the same identity that was here 100 years ago, before this body-mind even came into being. And when this body-mind goes back into the elements, that will still, you're still in that same positionless position.
Do we see who we are before we have a body?
Yes, but there's no collector. There's no one's collecting information. There's no evidence of it. So yes, you already know. Good question. Unusual for you. Go on. All right, go ahead. You're running a big risk here. Yes.
What does the body do to help us see that?
It gives us a three-dimensional time-space continuum where we can actually train our minds. The only reason you're here is it's a big school. But you could spend lifetime after lifetime after lifetime just going in circles. From the point of view of reality, there is no time. This doesn't mean that we don't experience time. We do all the time with, when's lunch? That kind of thing. So we experience that, but it doesn't really add up to anything. It's like if I say, remember back 40 years ago? No, you can't do that. Not that old. Remember back 20 years ago? Remember that? When you were, 8? Were you 8? Yeah. You're 8 years old. What were you thinking about?
York peppermint patties.
What? York's peppermint patties? How many times did you think of that?
A lot. That was my third grade teacher's favorite candy.
It was? Did you steal it from them?
I gifted them to her.
Oh, you gave them. You've never given me any York's peppermint patties.
I like you.
You like me? Yeah, that would be good for me. Was your teacher also a diabetic? No. No.
Well, it wasn't, but then
Yeah.
the patties.
Further question? Questions? Andrew?
What is perception?
I don't know. How does it look to you?
I don't even know what it is.
That's pretty good. Well, you can describe it as there's something, and then there's eyes that see the something, and then there's some aspect of the mind that is the consciousness that is gathering that information, and then there's an imputation that there's someone who is perceiving that. But the actual perception is just that. If you actually see what is in front of you, you won't see anything. Ha! More? Was that a good South Park laugh, or not so good?
Simpsons.
Is suitable?
Yeah.
Okay. Not very good at that.
He was correcting you.
Or did I?
He took it back. It's a Simpsons laugh. Yeah. It's okay.
Oh. Yeah, I stand corrected.
That was a good Simpsons laugh.
It was a good Simpsons
Yeah,
laugh.
yeah.
Oh. Yeah, I'm old. Wait till you get here. The trouble I have, my goodness, I can't hardly find my way around. The Simpsons. I've been watching this other one. What is it called? Family Guy. Yeah. Pretty soon I'll get Family Guy and Simpsons mixed up. More about perception. So there we impute, we see something, and well, it's there, when there's distance. We're looking at it, or we hear, we smell, taste, touch, think, and then we think there's someone who's receiving that object of perception, object of consciousness. So the simple relative structure of it is the thing that is such great evidence that we are somebody, and we're over here, and we're having that problem, or we're having that strawberry shortcake. You know, we separate things out so we can get to the things we want, avoid the things we don't want. Very simple. And the things that we don't have any control over, we try to shut down on or ignore. Those are the three ways of avoiding what is the truth. And so it's not about stopping or starting any one of those. It's about no longer defending yourself against anything. More?
Is a relative is a dependent origination a relative truth?
Yes. Yeah, if you see dependent origination, which is a basic teaching of the Buddha, one of them anyway, basic that every single thing you see as being separate is not fundamentally separated in the way you impute or the way you think it is or the way you imagine it is. If you see dependent origination, you have no more enemies. And you don't have friends in the same sense you did before, because you're not looking for people who overlook your difficulties, which is what friends usually do. They like you no matter what kind of problems you have. So yes, it's relative. You see that everything's dependently arisen. It's seeing that. But then if you see that fundamentally without any and the imputation or the imaginary nature that goes on top of that, the projection of I like this, I don't like that, this is good, this is bad. If you see that's also a part of dependent origination, then this is called a perfected nature. Then this is the nature of awakening, if you're still in a human form or any form of consciousness. More?
Oh, isn't chasing down causal relationships circular? I mean, if you asked us to find out if independent origination, what is it, or if it's true.
Just look at it. You don't have to chase it down. If you start chasing it down, this is not what I meant. No chase. It's all. Go ahead, please. Go ahead.
Well, I think the question's coming from an attempt to understand what actually dependent origination is. So I think it just makes me curious to look at something's causal nature and to identify that thing as dependently arisen by seeing where it comes from, but then seeing where that comes from.
So you can. That doesn't work. You have to see it more deeply than that. One of the ways that I've talked about it is this sound is this moving through space, running into a solid object creates something else, a sound. So the invisible or the unsearchable part of that is we don't really know where this came from. If it was inside of a tree at some point and was taken out of it. We don't know where this wood came from. We also don't know particularly where the hand came that is doing this. You can impute or you can imagine, well, it's a person. But you know, it starts to get more and more like a labyrinth of causes and conditions. This is the metaphor for this in the sutras or in the poem is it Jewelmere or tributary streams flowing in the darkness? Just a metaphor for how complicated karma is. There's not just cause and effect, but there's everything behind that cause. That you're looking at that cause and that effect. That effect sends out ripples everywhere, and that cause comes from all kinds of different activity or pushing and pulling called karma or action. And you can't find the first cause. This is why it's such a, and you've heard me say this before, why it's such a misunderstanding to take someone who is having any kind of difficulty, someone who's a criminal or someone who's done something that's antisocial, even if it's really terrible, and to punish them rather than try to help them. It's if you look at it, why wouldn't you, even if somebody's totally crazy and is murdering people, you know, let's stop them from murdering people, then let's try to help them. What a revolutionary idea is that? Actually take somebody who's suffering. Yes.
Is dependent origination trying to point at something that is unknowable?
It's unknowable from the point of view of it has no the fancy word for this is ontological status. It has no status as things and items that you can trace down and collect them all up and okay, now I'm starting to see the big picture now. There's 458 billion of this, and those all came together, but then you've left out a few. So you can't do that. You have to see, when I say you can't, I don't know what you can do. But the way it looks here is you have to just see the fundamental nature of it, and you do that with the consciousness, as your consciousness. There isn't anything but this. Anything else but what you're experiencing right now is extra. This is a beginning of compassion. Compassion is not a fancy, kind, loving feeling for other people or other things. That maybe play into it to some extent, but actual compassion isn't looking for people who deserve your affection and comfort and your generosity. It radiates everywhere, and it's outrageous in the sense that it might not show up in the way that people think it should. It doesn't belong to anyone. The same with consciousness or wisdom. There's no owner of it. There's no one who's wise. There's just wisdom.
There's thing is accommodation.
Accommodation may be part of the path. You may be working with yourself to try to accommodate things as a process to work with energy that's difficult for you to work with. You may be extending yourself to accommodate things, but actual compassion doesn't have a compassionator. It doesn't have, there's no object there. Fundamentally, totally, completely, absolutely. It's even difficult, I mean, I'm talking about it, but you know, everything I say is a lie, so that's why I say you shouldn't believe me. You can't actually open your mouth and speak without saying things that are partial evidence. So we just do the best we can. That's why you hear, if you study Zen or even the Tibetan tradition, you find teachers who talk in riddles, Zen koans or stories and so on. They kind of reverse the logic, and that's in order to support you, help you to not continue to grasp onto some things and reject other things, but to have a natural sense of balance, or equanimity is the fancy word for it. Thank you.
In the jewel mirror it says form and image behold each other.
Yes.
What is that?
So form and image behold each other. I think it's a way of talking about the potential for the experience of a human being who is functioning with their six sense fields, including the mind and the thoughts. It's a way of encouraging you to look directly at everything and see that actually what you're looking at is looking back at you. It's a very relative way of saying it. But since there's no ego anymore, there's no grasping and a self-centeredness, you're not particularly freaked out by that. You just notice that you're not separate from anything.
Is then the perceiver absent?
There never was a perceiver. The perceiver may still be there, but the perceiver is a imposter. You don't have to get rid of an ego that if you see that ego is unreal, you don't have to get rid of it. If you try to get rid of it and you do manage to get rid of your self-centeredness, quite often what happens is we start to get puffed up and we start to be kind of a holy person who's a little bit higher than everybody else, and notice that other people really have trouble. Some of the theistic religions carry that kind of situation. Not accusing them of anything, but sometimes that happens. More about that?
What's perceived with the form and image beholding?
So initially, one might begin to see that everything one looks at is not really, you're not really separate from it. It's like looking in a mirror. Like everywhere you look, it's kind of mirror-like. You're kind of seeing yourself. But then at some point or points, even looking in the mirror is not seeing anything. At some point, there just isn't anything else. But that doesn't mean we go the other way and say everything looks like the same thing. This is why it's called a spiritual path rather than a mundane path of getting somewhere and losing sometimes and getting ahead other times, and the kind of materialism we talk about quite often. It's not about avoiding materialism, it's being aware that you're sometimes headed that way.
Is there a same thing?
What? Is there what?
A same.
Same? Do these look like the same thing?
Not exactly.
How about now? So I'm being silly about it, but I'm just saying, what do you mean by same? I'll respond to the question as soon as I understand what you're asking me.
If we see two things that look different, are they actually the same?
Both and neither. You can't say it anyway. As long as we're using relative language, we have to go all directions with it. It's like the fourfold negation of Nagarjuna: not this, not that, not both, not neither. We have to totally negate physical manifestation that shows up as something separate from something else. But we have to start somewhere, so we start with looking at what's moving in space. When you're sitting, you're watching your thoughts come and go and come and go. And at some point or points, your allegiance to the thoughts starts to change over, and you start to have allegiance to the space that the thoughts arise in. And then the thoughts are more kind of depersonalized. Then you can have very negative thoughts and not a problem. You can have very positive thoughts and it's not particularly seductive.
What gives rise to the allegiance?
Wisdom is seeking wisdom. That's why you're here. That's why we're here. We're here. It's like a school. And the people in the 13th century, they were probably doing the same thing. And the people in the 28th century, there'll be some of those doing that too. There is a 28th century. More?
Thank you.
Shoshi.
It's going off what you were just talking about. Are there characteristics of the so-called imposter or perceiver that are sort of standard or archetypal that we can know or be aware of?
Well, there's we can watch people, if you know somebody that you would consider self-centered or narcissistic or, preoccupied with who they are and their image and how they're doing and how they look to others, it shows up differently. Some people, their self-centeredness is very subtle, and you wouldn't even think that wouldn't even use that as a term to apply to them, yet there is strong self-centeredness happening there. And if it's fueled by ignorance, then it's a shutting down rather than a display. But if it's fueled by pride, then it's more of a display, like how good I'm doing, or some kind of a preoccupation with how one appears to others. So we're always trying to get our feedback from others. So it shows up that way. Shows up, I think that traditionally there's 4 different ways in the Yogacara tradition that are talked about in the 7th consciousness. So that part of the mind that is paranoid and trying to protect itself.
Do you remember the 4 different ways?
No, but Chiazan does.
Pride of self.
Pride,
Love of self.
love of self,
Self-delusion.
self-delusion. I think it's a self-reference. Everything is in terms of me. Everything is about me. Sometimes you'll talk to somebody, and as soon as you start telling them about something that happened to you, they'll come up with something that's better than what happened to you. I went sailing there today. Oh, I've been sailing. I just went sailing myself. Or you start to talk about your son, and they'll start telling you about their son. And just totally interrupt, and you find out later you don't even have a son. Crazy people. Yes.
Up in Muskegon, Tammy and Amber are with Jim, and
Very
Tammy
good.
has a question.
Yes.
She says, "Hi, my name is Tammy. When I was about 12, I had dissociative personality disorder, in which I felt like I wasn't in my own body and watching a movie. Because of that, I am afraid to completely let myself go. I'm afraid the disorder will come back because the feeling was similar to meditating."
You're very lucky. You're very lucky. Most people don't have that situation happening. This doesn't mean, I'm not a doctor, so I'm not saying what you're having might not have some kind of chemical or physiological situation happening too. But the way you describe it means that there's some kind of a lack of solidity around the self-centeredness. Meditate. Sit down, hold still, and begin to look deeply into who you are, what you are. I will help you as long as I'm here. And also, you're practicing with Jim, so you have a small group there. That's the support.
She has another question.
Yes.
Is everything nothing?
Sometimes it can appear that way when we get nihilistic, or just we begin to see that we can't find any reference points to anything. But nothing is also relative. It's opposed to something and nothing. To say is everything nothing, I would say no. I could say yes and no, but that might be confusing. I would say it's not exactly nothing, but let's say it this way. It's not what we thought it was. And what did we think it was? We thought it was all separate. We thought that we could run away from bad things and get to good things, and we somehow have some success. Probably not going to happen. The fundamental situation that happens with everyone here, everyone there, is that you pass away. Probably me sooner than the rest of you. I'm not particularly concerned about that, but I certainly was at one time. And so I would recommend that you continue to train your mind. I mean, if it's if you want to look deeper into this, then go ahead. But if it's too frightening, then don't do it. Do something else. So there's no right or wrong. Right or wrong is extra, and that includes me. I'm not right. I'm not right, not wrong. I'm just saying this. And if you resonate with it, then you'll know. If you don't resonate, go to the casino. Or talk to a therapist. Sometimes just talking to a therapist helps. Kind of temporary. But it may help. I don't know. Yes, sir.
You're talking about an image you use sometimes about the allegiance switching over to the space.
Yes.
Does that allegiance fall away at some point too?
Yes. Eventually there's no allegiance to anything. There isn't anyone to have any allegiance. But there needs to be some kind of a path. So this is what you're experiencing being here as a meditator over the last half a year, whatever it's been, months, 6 months, 7 months, 8 months. What's it been? 8 months? 9 months? Yeah. So that's something you're experiencing, that the ebb and flow of your consciousness, starting to find things and then losing track of things, and starting to find things and losing track of things. More?
Is there a familiarization with just that ebbing and flowing?
Yes, there could be. Once you lessen your demand, you get so you don't care if you have negative feelings or positive feelings, or just feelings. It's just like preferring really nice weather all the time instead of enjoying the terrible weather. When it's really cold. Am I saying I enjoy it? No, I don't enjoy it. But I appreciate what it is, because it's a huge contrast, especially this last deep freeze we were in. That was really kind of amazing how incredibly cold that was. And now it's, quite warm. So appreciation has to do with having some respect or understanding for all of the things that we go through, all the really difficult things human beings go through. And just like the weather coming and going, it's nothing personal there.
Is realization something that comes and goes?
If you think you're realized, then yes. If you think you're on top of it all, then that's probably good. Your realization will fade, because it's something that's coming into being, just like the body comes into being and passes out of being. I'm not saying you don't have some insights, of course, but have insights, but they come and go. Actual realization or liberation is not an experience, so therefore it can't go away. It's just like you woke up, and how are you going to go to sleep again when you're awake? What you're awake to is that nothing is separate from anything else, and it's completely ordinary at the same time as it's completely mind-blowing, to use a conventional metaphor. Yes.
Is it possible for someone to go back to sleep?
I don't think if they awaken, I don't know, so I haven't awakened yet, so I don't know. I just like to talk about it. Yes, sir.
Where does the idea of a perceiver come from?
I think it has to do with fear, that if everything is going okay, we're kind of good with not strengthening that identity. Things are going, but if something threatens us, we go back into a kind of paranoia about everything. We start to look for ways to get out of here, or ways to defend ourselves against an imagined threat. Which creates a strong identity as a perceiver of the threat. Perceiving a threat and perceiving a chocolate cake are probably quite a bit different. Can you have chocolate cake? Yeah. That's right, that's your favorite cake, isn't it? Yeah, see, you thought I forgot. Every time I start to forget, then Danny reminds me, it's chocolate. Right? So I think I think it's that's where we get the sharp edge of the identity of, oh my gosh, I can't go there. That's going to be terrible. That'll be terrifying. More about that. That's good.
Should we pursue fear? Go into things that scare us?
No. Sit back and receive. You go into anything, then we've got some kind of strategy where we're trying to accomplish something or get over something. As meditators, just sit down, whether you're a Buddhist or not, doesn't make any difference to me. If you're training your mind, that means you sit down, you hold still, and you sharpen that awareness so that you can see more clearly when you get up off the cushion, up off the chair, and you go out into your everyday life. You see really clear. You actually see. One of the ways it shows up is not so much with we feel different, but we notice that our understanding of others starts to change. One of the things that shows up quite often is a person that maybe used to really irritate us because of their attitude towards us. We begin to see that the reason they're acting that way is because they're so unhappy. So it's kind of like without even thinking about it, you start to give the person the benefit of the doubt a little bit more. You cut them a little slack, as the saying goes, even though they're acting the same way they did 3 months ago. So you can kind of see, you can see that they're having difficulty, and they don't know you can see it. They can't even see it. And why can't they see it? Because they close it down so they can attack you. Anytime you blame, you're protecting this. Anytime you blame anybody, nobody's at fault for anything. That doesn't mean that somebody didn't run into your car, or somebody didn't steal your asparagus, or run off with your dog. Somebody run off with your
It's a
dog.
nice image, though. I was just like gleefully.
Yeah, I got him. Not my dog now. So it's not that somebody didn't do something, it's just that triggers problems that you have that you haven't looked at. And so by meditating, over time you begin to make friends with yourself. You get so you know more deeply what's happening with your emotions, with your mind. You realize why you could say you're doing that because you're being triggered because there's areas that have not been looked at closely. Get to know yourself. Trungpa Rinpoche, my teacher, said, make friends with yourself. How do you do that? Sit down and look at how much you dislike yourself or hate yourself or are upset with yourself. Sit down and look at it. Make friends. Be friends. If you can't be if you're not friends here, it's going to be really hard to be friends with anybody. I mean, you can put on that you're friends, but the minute that friend does something you don't care for, you start blaming. That's what I do with Shoto all the time. Yes,
Tammy has another follow-up.
I bet she does.
She says, you said if I didn't want to take this path because of fear, then don't. I want to. To me, this means I have to trust my soul. I think, in quotes.
Is that a question? Don't trust anything. You don't have to trust any. Don't trust me. Don't trust anything. Don't trust yourself. But if you say I have to be on this path, then just be on the path. You don't need any trust. You just need a schedule. Isn't it the truth? You got all my guys here. You just need to know what time do you sit, what time do you get up. You don't need to trust anything.
Just write it down.
Yeah, write it down. Can you hear them laugh? These are people that sit a lot. They think that's funny. You wouldn't think that's funny if you'd never meditated much. It would not be funny. Yes.
Is there trust in space?
I think tentatively there can be trust in the gap. When the gap shows up somewhere where you don't know something for a while, don't fill it up with guesswork or speculation. Allow yourself to space out so you don't know what's going on. Allow yourself to do that and get used to what it's like to be you without without knowing anything, without filling anything up. And notice it's not all that threatening. You don't have to really be filling up all the space so nothing weird can creep in.
If characteristics are absent of what we think they are, positive, negative, or neutral, what exactly are characteristics?
What?
Well,
Did you answer that and then ask me what it was?
I don't think so.
Okay, go ahead.
Did I?
Did he?
Anybody else feel that way?
I always think of the agamas when we start talking about characteristics.
So characteristics fall apart from any kind of imputation, or like not particularly trying to show up a particular way. You just show up and whatever happens is appropriate. Is that what you're asking about?
I think so. I'm trying to put it out in words, but well, it came up when you mentioned earlier that when at some point you may look in the mirror and you won't see anything, or you won't see anyone.
But it's not like there's nobody there. I don't mean that there's suddenly you're,
Right.
and then nobody's there. That's more like when you're 8 years old and that happens.
So are you saying that the physical characteristics are still there, but there's
Yeah, everything is there, but there's no separate. You just see people thinking they're somebody.
so both the physical characteristics and the thoughts of I think that somebody are still there.
Yes, all that. Just like the who was it? Suzuki Roshi said, "When I look out, all I see is the Buddha everywhere. Everyone is totally awake until they open their mouth, and then I see how they're not quite the Buddha yet, or maybe they are, but they just don't know it." So yeah. So when you say you don't see anything, you don't see anything separate. It's quite amazing. Of course, I'm not making any claims. Don't make claims. They can be disputed. Yes?
When we start to see how we're adding to our own
Yes.
difficulty, is there a way to retract the why question, or take a step back from why am I doing this?
So I think that a little bit. I think there's a little bit of that happening, but I wouldn't try to do it so much that you're trying to just be a different person who doesn't do that anymore. But a little bit. You can just draw the energy. If you see the way the confusion, how it's getting its energy from out of hope and fear, passion, aggression, ignorance, then you might be able to slow it down a little bit. But I wouldn't get too greedy for results. It's like a willingness you'll work with it, but a willingness to continue to be that way as long as it's necessary till you can fundamentally see who you are. This is called humility. Further questions?
Why is humility so painful?
Are you having pain over that?
I have.
You're
not
trying really hard to be
currently.
humble. Can't be humble, it's too hard. Be humble.
I'm so mad and sad for being so proud.
All right, that's good.
Only in hindsight.
Well, that's the best kind of sight. So, I don't know. I mean, it's different with each person. It's just a matter, each person we have the inspiration of the Buddha's teaching, who 2,500 years ago taught this, and then other teachers down through the centuries, including my teachers, helped me. I'm trying to help others. And so it's, there's no guarantee of anything, but each person has to do this themselves.
What can we conclude when we see I think that there is a thought? Is there anything more to
Don't conclude anything. Always include. There's the good clued and the bad clued. That's, so, conclude, don't conclude. Don't do it. Stop it. That's my conclusion. So the idea of concluding is, it's not so much about stopping that, it's just noticing that you're coming to some kind of clamping down on some kind of understanding, or, well, that's the reason this happened is because of that. As soon as you do that, you stop looking and you conclude. The self-centered mind, the ego mind, loves conclusions because it reinforces the feeling of, well, I understand that. And if you watch television, you see people doing this constantly, concluding things. And some people are so good at it, they're even fairly pleasant to watch. And other people are really irritating to watch because the way they conclude is by blaming others and so on. More?
And what is there when we see, I think?
It's just a concept. Just a concept. You don't have to get rid of it. You don't have to do anything with it. Don't add. Do no math. Unless you're pounding code. Then you might have to do a lot of math. But that's a specific time when you're sitting down and you're at your job and just do whatever you have to do. That's like somebody who is a meditator and they meditate all the time and their job is to go out and kill people. Strike that. Well, I mean, it could happen. Somebody could be a meditator and be working in a prison and working in an area where they're actually caging people in a hell realm and making money locking people up. So there's lots of different levels of that. A person who does a lot of sitting practice of meditation, eventually that will be harder and harder for them to make their living that way. But that doesn't mean that they will stop doing that. They might start doing it a different way. They might start actually trying to help the people that are in there by being kind to them, by being understanding. Most of the guards I've met in prison are not particularly kind. And they don't really stop and think that they're locked up too. Do they? It doesn't look like they, because they have uniforms on and they have keys. So they get to go in and out. Further questions? Thank you very much.
We'll stand and dedicate the merit in the back of our red chant books. I'd like to remind everybody about the donation boxes we have in the hallway. We gladly receive and appreciate your financial support to help us keep these teachings alive for others.
Help us buy coffee.
Are we out of coffee?
May the merit of this penetrate into all places, so that we and every sentient being together can realize the Buddha's way. Jio san chi shifu shi son mu sa moko sa moko ja. The 10 directions, the 3 worlds, all Buddhas, all venerable ones, Bodhisattvas, Mahasattvas, the great Prajna, Paramita.
O Buddhas and Bodhisattvas of the 10 directions and the 3 times, please hear us. Please come down out of the light and protect Sokukoji Buddhist Temple Monastery. Our Sangha, families, friends, and visitors, heal everyone who is unhappy, sick, or suffering, and fill them with light.